All right, you guys. So we are pretty much halfway through with The Great Gatsby, and after chapter six, things really start ramping up, which I'm very, very excited about. So before I get into chapter six, like usual, we're just going to quickly review chapter five. In chapter five, Gatsby and Daisy reunite at Nick's house for tea. We know that it is awkward, it's very uncomfortable, and the motif of weather really communicates that. It communicates Gatsby's mood at the beginning with the rain, the brief moments of sunshine, more rain, and then ultimately, a beautiful day at the end. We know that there is a symbol of the overwound and broken clock, and that it is his representation, Fitzgerald's representation of Gatsby and Gatsby's desire to turn back time back to 5 years ago when he first met Daisy. But ultimately the clock is broken, right? And then Gatsby shows Daisy his house. Daisy is absolutely amazed. And Nick kind of leaves them to reminisce together. So in chapter six, what we're really going to end up seeing is this combination of both of the worlds, right? So you've got the world of West Egg, which is the new money. It's where Gatsby lives. It's this, riotous affair. There's less class. And then you have, obviously, East Egg, which is represented through Daisy and Tom. So in this chapter one, we're going to learn about Gatsby's actual history, where he actually comes from. And we're also going to see this combination and kind of a clashing of these two worlds because Daisy and Tom end up coming to one of Gatsby's parties. Which is the first time ever that either Tom or Daisy have been there. And so it's going to be a real evaluation of Gatsby, of Daisy and Gatsby's relationship. So it's a very fascinating chapter, especially when it comes to interpersonal relationships. So if you guys will turn to your books to chapter 6, from my book, it starts at page 97. About this time, an ambitious young reporter from New York arrived one morning at Gatsby's door and asked him if he had anything to say. "Anything to say about what?" inquired Gatsby politely. "Why, any statement to give out." It transpired after a confused 5 minutes that the man had heard Gatsby's name around his office in a connection which he either wouldn't reveal or didn't fully understand. This was his day off, and with laudable initiative, he had hurried out to see. It was a random shot, and yet the reporter's instinct was right. Gatsby's notoriety spread about the hundreds who had accepted his hospitality and so became authorities upon his past, had increased all summer until he fell just short of being news. Contemporary legends such as the underground pipeline to Canada attached themselves to him, and there was one persistent story that he didn't live in a house at all, but in a boat that looked like a house and was moved secretly up and down the Long Island shore. So I'm going to pause there. Notoriety, I'm sure you guys have heard that. The actual definition is it's a state of being famous or well known for a bad quality or deed. Not a good quality, but specifically bad. And you have this kind of like probably young, upstarting reporter who wants to get ahead of the story. And so on his day off, he decides to go above and beyond, track Gatsby down and say, "Hey, do you have a comment?" Because so many people had visited Gatsby's house. And therefore they kind of claimed like, "Oh, well, like I've been to his party. I actually know Gatsby. Like his history is this, this, and this." So they claimed to know more about him than they did. And so obviously, rumors start spreading. People start attaching their names, even though they have no right to. And Gatsby falls just short of being news. And then the underground pipeline to Canada kind of also like emphasizes the fact that Gatsby probably made his money from bootlegging, because in the 1920s, there was this massive scandal that people were transporting illegal liquor from Canada. So anyway, continuing. Just why these inventions were a source of satisfaction to James Gatz of North Dakota isn't easy to say. James Gatz. That was really, or at least legally, his name. He had changed it at the age of 17, and at the specific moment that witnessed the beginning of his career, when he saw Dan Cody's yacht drop anchor over the most insidious flat on Lake Superior. It was James Gatz who had been loafing along the beach that afternoon in a torn green jersey and a pair of canvas pants. But it was already Jay Gatsby who borrowed a rowboat, pulled out to the Tuolumne, and informed Cody that a wind might catch him and break up in a half an hour. So here's the first part of his history. His actual name is not Jay Gatsby, it's James Gatz. He's from North Dakota, and he changed his name at 17 years old when he saved this kind of man in the middle of the, Lake Superior who was going to essentially drown, and his name was Dan Cody. I suppose he'd had the name already for a long time, even then. His parents were shiftless and unsuccessful farm people. His imagination had never really accepted them as his parents at all. So as you can see, this is the picture that they show in the movie. He was from shiftless, unsuccessful farm people in the middle of North Dakota. So he wasn't somebody who was born into money, though he wants to communicate that he was. He actually started at the lowest of the low. Now, I'm going to explain the next line because it comes from a philosophical thought, okay? So pay close attention. And it's also very important, too, who Gatsby is and how he's created himself. The truth was that Jay Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his Platonic conception of himself. He was a son of God, a phrase which, if it means anything, means just that. And he must be about his father's business, the service of a vast, vulgar, and meretricious beauty. So he invented just the sort of Jay Gatsby that a 17-year-old boy would be likely to invent, and this conception he was faithful to the end. So before I really explain what's going on, Platonic conception is a reference to Plato and the Greek philosopher, as you guys can see on the left side of your screen. Plato had taught through conversation, right? Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato were kind of like the major three of Greek philosophers. And Plato's theory is that everyone and everything on earth had a more perfect form that earth was representing. So it's from his theory of the caves, but that earth was a mere shadow of what it could be, and therefore so were people. That the lives that we live, the things that we touch are just mere shadows of perfection. So this earth, these people are not perfect. And that people and things desire that perfection and therefore change their lives in order to try to reach that. So that's this idea of a Platonic conception. So he also then attaches that to Jay Gatz as a 17-year-old boy. When you guys are, and again, this is your age, right? It's often that when we're younger, we have these massive dreams and massive ideas of who we could be, what the world has in store for us. And we have these kind of fantasies and reveries of achieving those in the future. And so what Fitzgerald is essentially saying is that from a very young age, Gatsby desperately wanted more from his life. And so he dreamt about what those things would be. And therefore, everything that he did subsequently was in order to achieve that perfection from that Platonic conception of himself. So in the movie, these are the two people that, this kind of represents. So you have James Gatz, the North Dakota 17-year-old, poor farm boy on the left. And he essentially created from his mind and therefore his actions, Jay Gatsby. And he was faithful to this vision he had of himself at a young age to the end. So, continuing. For over a year, he had been beating his way along the south shore of Lake Superior as a clam digger and a salmon fisher, or in any other capacity that brought him food and bed. His brown, hardening body lived naturally through the half-fierce, half-lazy work of the bracing days. He knew women early, and since then spoiled him because he became contemptuous of them, of young virgins because they were ignorant, of others because they were hysterical about things which in his overwhelming self-absorption he took for granted. So again, he slept around with a lot of people, he became contemptuous of that, and he was self-absorbed. But his heart was in constant, turbulent riot. The most grotesque and fantastic conceits haunted him in his bed at night. A universal of ineffable gaudiness spun itself out in his brain while the clock ticked on the washstand and the moon soaked with wet light his tangled clothes upon the floor. So again, you hear that clock, right? It says his brain while the clock ticked on the washstand. So the concept and the symbol of time is coming back. And this is where, his daydreams, his night dreams are going. He is in riot and wrestling with himself and what he could be. Each night he added to the pattern of his fancies until drowsiness closed down upon some vivid scene with an oblivious embrace. For a while these reveries provided an outlet for his imagination. They were a satisfactory hint of the unreality of reality, a promise that the rock of the world was founded securely on fairies' wings. So I just put that quote on the screen. Again, he's dreaming of this perfect world, his perfect life, the perfect person he's going to be. And it says that for a while, these dreams were satisfactory, right? He could dream about it and be content. And it provided this outlet for his creative imagination. But it also says down here, right, that it was founded securely on fairies' wings. One, fairies aren't real, right? And then if they were real, the fairies' wings are very fragile, right, and easily broken. They can't carry a lot. And so it's this idea that although he's dreaming, he's come up with this perfect conception of himself, it's really not that stable. And so there's irony in it saying securely on fairies' wings. An instinct toward future glory had led him, some months before, to the small Lutheran college of St. Olaf's in southern Minnesota. So again, he didn't go to Oxford. He went to this no-name college in southern Minnesota. He stayed there 2 weeks, dismayed at its ferocious indifference to the drums of his destiny. So again, it wasn't good enough, right? It's like, well, this isn't helping me pursue my destiny, my dream, my perfection. And so not only did he not go to Oxford, he only spent 2 weeks at college, so he never graduated from college. And despising the janitor's work with which he was to pay his way through. And so again, not only did he go to St. Olaf's for 2 weeks, but he couldn't afford. So again, talking about he comes from the lowest of the low, he couldn't even afford to pay his way through, so he had to do janitor work. So there's a massive contrast between Tom Buchanan and Gatsby. Then he drifted back to Lake Superior, and he was still searching for something to do on that day that Dan Cody's yacht dropped anchor in the shallows along shore. Cody was then 50 years old, a product of Nevada's silver fields of the Yukon, of every rush for metals since 75. So ever since 1875, Dan Cody has gone and done, the gold rushes, copper rushes, all of those things. The transactions in Montana copper that made him many times a millionaire found him physically robust, but on the verge of soft-mindedness, and, suspecting this, an infinite number of women tried to separate him from his money. The none too savory ramifications by which Ella Kay, the newspaper woman, played Madame de Matignon to his weakness and sent him to sea in a yacht, were common property of the turgid journalism of 1902. He had been coasting along all too hospitable shores for 5 years when he turned up as James Gatt's Destiny in Little Girl Bay. So Dan Cody is a millionaire because of all of the metal rushes that he had success on. However, even though his body was strong from all of the mining, his mind had kind of gone soft, and therefore he was easily manipulated by women who wanted his millions. And so then he talks about one specific situation in which Ella Kay essentially kind of got in with him and stole his money enough so that, he needed to, one, get away from the newspaper reports, and two, go out on a yacht. And that's how he comes across James Gatz. And James Gatz views Dan Cody in this appearance as his destiny. So I'll put some pictures. These are pictures that are in the movie. In Gatsby's room, there's just all of these kind of nautical maps and pictures of this man who is very much a father figure to Gatsby. To young Gatz, resting on his oars and looking up the railed deck, that yacht represented all the beauty and glamour in the world. I suppose he smiled at Cody. He had probably discovered that people liked him when he smiled. At any rate, Cody asked him a few questions. One of them elicited the brand new name, and found that he was quick and extravagantly ambitious. So again, when it says elicited the new name, it means that when Dan Cody was asking James Gatz about, hey son, what's your name? He, rather than saying James Gatz, he says J. Gatsby. So this idea that he was going to change his name has been something that it was right on the tip of the tongue because he had been thinking about it for a very long time. And found that he was quick and extravagantly ambitious. A few days later, he took him to the Duluth and brought him a blue coat, 6 pair of white duck trousers, and a yachting cap, And when the Tulumi left for the West Indies and the Barbary Coast, Gatsby left there too. So Dan invites him along, buys him kind of the sailing gear, and says, all right, you're coming with me. And therefore, Jay Gatz leaves his past behind.